So as most of you probably know, some time ago I made a video on Petrified Darkness, and I did a little bit of speculating on what exactly could be possible with the crystals themselves. This would obviously lead me to a long and pretty grueling researching session to make that video, and while I was making said video, I would take a look back at the Dark Skylanders to see what I can dig up. And even though I feel like I made something pretty good, I would realize that I had missed something, and it was once again with Glumshanks. Now, I'm surprised that I missed this, but in Rampart Ruins, Glumshanks shows off an extreme amount of power when he's evilized, which he uses to create missiles and build his tank, along with other stuff. This would lead to a rabbit hole down on my Discord, you should go check that out by the way, where I got a chance to talk to Folia, the local lore goblin that knows way more about the Skylanders lore than I do, and while we were talking, he would eventually bring up a certain story from one of the Skylanders annuals. Now, these books alone are surprisingly jam-packed with Skylanders games, fun facts, and most importantly, at least for today's subject, lore. And after learning about the story and reading it for myself, I just knew that I had to talk about it. A certain Skylander appears in this book in one of the most fascinating ways possible, and raises a bunch of different questions regarding the Dark Skylanders as a whole, along with some other stuff. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a more refined look at the Dark Skylanders as a group. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Now, before we fully jump into the story within the 2015 annual, we first have to take a look at how the Dark Skylanders came to be in the first place. And as most of you probably know, Spyro was the first Skylander to gain a dark form, so let's start out with him. When the darkness tried to corrupt the Core of Light prior to Spyro's adventures, it somehow managed to corrupt him, but before the darkness could fully take hold of him, Eon would manage to hold it off with a few hastily casted spells, and over time, Eon would teach Spyro how to control his newfound abilities. The next Skylander, or group of Skylanders, is where things kinda get screwy because they all share the same backstory, and these Skylanders are Slobbertooth, Stealth Elf, which also includes Super Shot Stealth Elf because they're the same person, Blast Zone, Washbuckler, and weirdly enough, Spitfire, and you'll understand why in a second. Now, the story goes like this. While these Skylanders were out on a special mission, they would stumble upon one of Chaos's secret lairs where they would find his brand new discovery, Petrified Darkness, and during their fight with Chaos, the lair would explode, which created a cloud of darkness that the Skylanders would willingly absorb to prevent it from harming Skylands or its residents. Spyro would then help and teach these Skylanders how to gain control of their dark forms, and that's pretty much it. But I do want to bring up something weird, and that's Spitfire. Now, according to the bio where all of this goes down, it calls Petrified Darkness a new discovery, and due to the fact that 2 SWAT Force members were caught up in this has to mean that this all takes place somewhere in between or after the events of SWAT Force, but still being relatively close to its events. There's one problem with this, however. Spitfire joined the Skylanders after the Sky Eater was activated. So with all of that in mind, either A, the story was just wrong about Petrified Darkness being a new discovery at the time, or B, Spitfire was somehow involved in this whole incident without being a Skylander, left the Skylanders after getting control of his dark form, and then returned to his racing career, and then he was recruited back into the Skylanders by Eon. Now, the most likely answer is probably A, but in my mind, B seems to be the more interesting choice in my eyes. Yes, it is convoluted as hell, but it gives a little more insight into why Eon chose Spitfire to be a Skylander specifically. He's not only shaken off something that should have destroyed his racing career and even killed him, but he was also able to harness the darkness without being a Skylander at the time. There's also the fact that Dark Supershot Stealth Elf exists, but that can be boiled down to her gaining a dark form beforehand and it just transferring over, which also makes me think that they can transfer this dark energy to their vehicles for obvious reasons. As many of you can probably tell, we're missing a couple of Skylanders, and that's because for most of the Dark Skylanders, depending on the game at least, they have different reasons on why they even have their dark forms in the first place. And for Snapshot, Food Fight, and Wildfire, it isn't that different. According to their backstories, in another one of Chaos's top secret layers, he had somehow figured out how to combine the darkness and Traptanium together to create Dark Traptanium, and when the Skylanders went to stop him, he was able to capture some of them before the Trapmasters arrived and smashed the Dark Traptanium, freeing them. The 3 captured Skylanders would pretty much go through the same training that most of the other Dark Skylanders go through, and they would learn how to control it. And even though I don't have that much to say, I do want to bring up something interesting. Dark Wolfgang, Golden Queen, Kingpin, Bowser, and Donkey Kong having no answers on why they have dark forms. In my personal opinion, Donkey Kong and Bowser make sense since they're crossover characters. But out of everyone here, I was expecting an answer for at least the reformed villains. Like seriously, how and where did they get these forms? I mean, it had to have happened during or before Superchargers since the darkness was banished, but for now, there's one more thing that I want to bring up, and that's Dark Spyro's weird evolution. And for that, we need to take a look at the 2015 Skylanders Annual for context. So let's get going. Now, within the 2015 annual, there's a two-part story written by Anke Beekman, the writer for most of the Skylanders novels, called Head Games, and in this story, Dark Spyro makes an appearance. So without further ado, let's get going. The story starts off with Flynn, Scorp, Wind-Up, and Spyro all traveling to the Weird Woods, an island hidden behind an ocean of storm clouds to help out a group of Ents under attack by Baron Von Shellshock. Because of the clouds, the Skylanders were forced to go there via the Dread Yacht, and at this point, they had been traveling for more than half an hour. So as you could probably guess, Scorp was beginning to get impatient. The weather wasn't helping much either, but they would manage to land on the island. And by land, I mean the Dread Yacht somehow ended up in the ground, but before they could discuss what happened, an Ent named Entwood would spring up from the ground, and after he rambles a bit, he would begin to lead them towards the incident. On the way there, he would explain to them that during their expedition, they would find an underground forest, and as the Skylanders reached it, they would witness Greebles harvesting petrified darkness from the trees as they grew from them, while the rest of the Ents were tied up in the middle of a clearing. What's interesting about these trees in my eyes is that I think that they were evilized prior to this since their bark is black, and from what I'm seeing in the artwork, the trees seem to be grasping the crystals in most of the cases where it's growing, but like I said, that's speculation. Anyways, Spyro would ask aloud where Shellshock was, and almost on cue, Shellshock would appear to tell his Greebles that they need to leave before the Skylanders arrive, and that's when the Skylanders jump in. They would begin to pummel the Greebles and begin to rescue the Ents, but while this was happening, and while Spyro was distracted with trying to get Flynn to untie the Ents and fend off his own group of Greebles, Spyro would be evilized by Shellshock and we would be left on a cliffhanger. But in the second part of the story, we will learn that Spyro wasn't evilized, but he instead willingly absorbed the darkness and became Dark Spyro, where he would continue to absorb more of the darkness from Shellshock's Evilizer before it shattered. Dark Spyro would tell him that Chaos tried flooding his body with darkness before, but that it had never worked, before Spyro would go on to destroy the crystals with his fireballs. But while he was doing this, Shellshock noticed Flynn escorting the Ents out of the cavern, and with the little power he had left in his staff, he evilized Flynn. For some reason, the darkness had a weird effect on him where his size grew with his ego. He was growing crystals on the top of his head, and Flynn was so damn big that his head was nearly touching the ceiling of the cavern. And to make matters worse, Dark Spyro was beginning to run out of steam. That's when Flynn's booms became literal explosions and began to knock the Skylanders around the cavern, and things started to get a little bleak from there. Scorp told Flynn to watch it because he'll quote-unquote have the roof down, and that gives Wind-Up an idea, and he starts glazing Flynn like his life depends on it, much to the confusion of Scorp and Dark Spyro before he explains the plan. To make a long story short, because I'm kinda running out of time, they all continue to compliment him until his head expanded so quickly that it smashed through the roof of the cave, destroying the crystals on the top of his head, thus de-evilizing him. And even though Shellshock managed to get away, things wrapped up pretty nicely. I highly suggest you go take a look at the story in the archives since I rushed through it and it's better if you read the story out on your own. But with that said and done, let's do some talking. Now, I think the most interesting thing I noticed about this backstory is how Spyro says that Chaos tried to pull this before, which to me, he's either talking about before when the darkness tried to corrupt the core of light, since everything surrounding that is kinda vague and it wouldn't be impossible for Chaos to be there, or this was an entirely separate incident since I'm pretty sure Spyro wasn't with the other Dark Skylanders when the petrified darkness exploded and became a cloud of darkness. It would have been mentioned somewhere in Dark Spyro's backstory, but no. In Swap Force's bio, it only mentions the first incident, which makes me wonder if the second incident is how we got Dark Mega Ram Spyro. The way that he appeared in the story was also really interesting as well, as it makes me wonder if the other Dark Skylanders could pull something like this off as well. Heck, now that I think about it, the Dark Skylanders might just have an immunity to the darkness because of this, or at least a pseudo-immunity. But since we've never seen that happen with anyone else, or the Dark Forms at all for the matter, it's all speculation for the moment. Another thing that I want to point out is Flynn's transformation, because for some odd reason, the crystals formed on his head exclusively, which makes me wonder if that was just the result of the staff being shattered, or or if it's just part of the Petrified Darkness's nature. As we saw in the story, it seems to be feeding its power off of Flynn's ego specifically, which makes me wonder if that's how Petrified Darkness works with all of its victims. It usually goes for specific parts of the body, which in turn allows the evilized creature to use it as a weapon or gives them a special ability of some sort. But it could have just been a special case here. But with all of that said and done, I think that this is the best spot where I could wrap this video up. So I'd like to thank you all for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow the channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, check out Return to Skylands along with the Discord and the music used in this video down in the description below, and I will see you all in the next one.